And so, Mary, I think you're going to talk about rendering here now.
Okay. So back to rendering materials. And this kind of just follows with what Mark has been saying about customizing your families and parts. So again, you might have delivered families and parts or even ones you've created in your workspace, and you want to change the rendering materials on those. And so I'm just I've got a video here, and I'll, so in this case, I want to change the rendering materials on the brick, maybe in the concrete, even my curtain wall. Curtain wall is a little bit special. We'll talk about that. So if I open up my family and part editor here, right now, all these parts are at my workspace level. And we'll go take a look, for instance, at wall components. And I've got a brick part in there. If I change this to rendering properties, I can see I've got a material there attached to my brick part. If I select that, it will actually open the palette. And I could select a different material. But I have to be careful because this is at my workspace level. That means multiple projects might be using that particular part. If I change the material, I'm changing it for every project that points to that particular part. So this is a case, just like Mark's been doing, I'd want to select my parts that I want to change, and I'm going to copy them up to my work set folder so that I have those parts at the work set level where I could modify them and only affect my project. So I'm going to do this exact same thing for the curtain wall. I'm going to select, for instance, the framing for the curtain wall and the glazing, the two things that have materials that I might want to adjust. And so again, I'm just going to select them here, do a copy, go back up to my architectural XML and paste them. So they have the exact same family name, the exact same part. We're using the concatenation to override. I'm going to save that. This is a case because I created a new XML where I'm going to need to close the application and reopen. So we'll do that and then go back into the family and part editor. And now if I go into, for instance, we'll go back and look at the workspace. We can see our curtain wall parts, for instance, are red now because it's not reading the ones from the workspace. It's reading the ones in my work set. So I'm going to go back to the rendering properties, and we'll start here. I'm going to actually change my precast concrete material here. And so I'm just going to pick a different one here, such as concrete stained. And you'll see it immediately changes in the model. It's kind of a little yellow there, but we'll adjust that later. Then let's go up and maybe look at some different bricks. So again, I just selected, it opens the palette. And these are delivered palettes that come, it's in the Connect Shared Content folder. And there's a variety of different bricks, colors, and patterns there. And I could go through and try a couple different ones. You can immediately see what it looks like. I'm only changing it for my particular project since I'm in that work set level. So we'll try one more here, something a little more gray, I think, for this building. Okay, so that looks better. I am going to go back and change that concrete and maybe, again, find something a little more gray. So those materials are going to show up in your display as long as you have an illustrated type display style or a smooth rendering. And then, of course, they also get used by the rendering engine if you're doing any photorealistic rendering. Now, I'm also going to do the curtain wall because the curtain wall is just a little bit different. Because of this curtain wall system and the way it reads the families and parts, it just behaves a little bit differently. So you can see there, I changed the frame to galvanized steel, but we didn't see a change in the model. And I'm going to change the glass instead of a kind of a blue tint. We're going to put a green tint on it. Again, we're not going to immediately see that change, but we can push it through. So we're going to go ahead and save those changes to our family and part editor. And then I actually have to go up to the curtain wall tool. On the pull down there is the update curtain wall definition. This makes the curtain wall go back and read any changes in the family part system and updates it. So now you can see the changes to the glass color and the frame material there. And I think we'll just go on to geometry maps as well, since we're talking about materials. So I had mentioned earlier that geometry maps was something that is also set by the material that's assigned to the part. So in this drawing here, you can see the brick on the building there, and also the horizontal lines on the metal panels. Those are really just line patterns that are getting applied in the drawing view based on the geometry map assigned to the part. So just to kind of take a look at what that looks like, in order to do this, you actually have to open the material editor and select the material that's applied to the part. So in this case, I've got brick multicolor, and I want to assign a geometry map to it. Now, that setting is actually one thing we didn't talk about yet, was the fact that we now use PBR materials. These are physically based rendering materials. The settings are simplified for those, and there's a little blue circle up there that indicates it's basically a toggle between the settings for PBR materials versus sort of what we call the legacy settings. You actually do have to go back to the legacy settings to be able to apply the geometry map. You can then switch it back to the PBR materials. It'll still read the geometry map, but it's just that's where you have to set it. And so you basically select a geometry map, which essentially is a pattern cell, comes from a cell library. We deliver several of these cell libraries. There's some which are called geometry maps clean and geometry maps sketchy, which are in the Connect shared content folder that comes delivered. And then in the data sets, the regional data sets, there's a geometry maps, bricks and blocks. There's an imperial one and a metric one. Depending on the data set. And those are basically standard brick and block patterns, different, Romans, Flemish, all the different, brick pattern types. Now I'm actually pointing to one here that I copied, and then I went in and I changed the colors of all the cells. I'll explain in a minute why I did that. But essentially you just attach the correct pattern cell to the geometry map, and then that's what will get displayed on the drawings. Now, so you can see there, here's my part in the family and part editor. So by default, that pattern map will take the symbology of the forward view drawing symbology. So in that example there, it's on a wall, it's set to a color, a kind of reddish color, and that's how the pattern shows up in the drawing. So right now, that pattern map is using the symbology that's assigned to the drawing symbology of that particular family and part. But there are a couple of other options. For instance, on the geometry map, so this is back in the material editor when you assign that geometry map, you can see here there's an option that says use cell color. And that is the reason I was saying I'd customized my own cell library. I went in and changed all the cells to have a gray color. And then I selected that use cell color. That way, that overrides your family and part forward mapping. So if you can see in this drawing, I can still see the red lines on the edges of the wall, but the pattern map itself is a grayscale because it's based on the actual cell color. So that's an option. I often like to kind of gray out my patterns. I don't really want them to show, as dark as, for instance, the line work. Be aware, though, there's another override. So if you're using, a display style, for instance, on your clip volume settings for your forward view, where you might be overriding color. So, for instance, we have a forward drawing black display style. If you apply that, that overrides everything. And so my patterns would be black, the wall lines would be black, and so forth. So just a couple things to think about there. That's it. And I will send it back to you, Mark.
Okay, great. So just to reiterate, what Mary said about the curtain wall definitions, there is that update. Basically, what happens with the curtain wall, which is kind of a very unique tool that has kind of like nested data group information of the frame types and everything in there. It basically stores the rendering materials locally, and the definitions are saved in the DGN. That's why we need that update button.
If you found this video helpful, please give it a like. If you want to see more such series, consider subscribing to our channel. Thank you, and see you next time.